end of the Carol Burnett show also saw the end of the 70s approaching, and while it was a very successful decade career-wise, back here in Beverly Hills, Carol was in the midst of a very challenging battle with her firstborn daughter, Carrie. Now, I'm not someone who likes to talk about people's drug abuse or addiction. I'm not interested in it. I don't find it fascinating like a lot of people do. In fact, I find it very personal and very private, but I'm going to discuss it because Carol did. She went public with this, and therefore it's a very small part of her legacy. It doesn't feel very gossipy to talk about this. But first of all, you have to know that Carol was not only the type of mother who revolved her entire work schedule around her children, but she actually tucked them in at night. She laid in bed with them, reading them stories till they fell asleep. She was a very hands-on mother. Well, Joe and Carol sent Carrie to Harvard Westlake, a private school here in Beverly Hills, where in 1977, 13-year-old Carrie enrolled in the 9th grade. She also enrolled in a rowdy group of kids who liked to smoke marijuana, and they did pills, uppers, downers, you name it. Well, Joe and Carol were pretty heartbroken. They had really raised Carrie so near and dear to them. They reprimanded her, but to no avail. By the summer of 1978, she was using mushrooms, speed, Seconal, cocaine. It was a very exhausting and harrowing period in Carol's life. It was very strenuous on the entire family. They tried everything to help her. They even sent her to a rehab in Texas. I'm really giving you the short, condensed version because this actually went on for a very long time, and Carol had no choice but to go back to work while Carrie tried to get her life in order. Carol actually churned out a handful of stellar television movies. The first one was The Grass is Always Greener Over the Septic Tank, which I actually just found out recently that it was a TV movie. The video store I worked at in high school had a VHS copy that I watched over and over. I always thought it was a movie. But it was written by Jenna McMahon and Dick Clare. And in my opinion, Carol's co-star is one of the most underrated comedic gems of all time, Charles Grodin. It's about a busy New York City couple who move their family, one of their kids is played by Eric Stoltz, to the suburbs where they assume life is going to be a lot easier, but instead a lot of chaotic hilarity ensues. It aired on October 28, 1978, and was produced by our very own Joe Hamilton.
The Grass is Always Greener Over the Septic Tank comes to television, starring Carol Burnett and Charles Grodin. A very funny look at life, Wednesday at 9, 8 Central and Mountain. On the CBS Wednesday night movie, Suburbia. He's in love with his lawn and she's falling for a little league coach. The grass is always greener over the septic tank.
Then came, in my opinion, Carol Burnett's greatest dramatic acting role, playing Peg Mullen in 1979's Friendly Fire. Carol and the brilliant Ned Beatty play a couple from rural Iowa whose son dies in Vietnam. Timothy Hutton, a few years before winning his Oscar for Ordinary People, plays one of their sons, the soldier's brother. It's based on a true story where the government said that their son died by friendly fire, but upon closer investigation, they uncover lies and cover-ups and try to get to the bottom of what really happened. And this might be one of my all-time favorite casting stories. David Green was an Emmy-winning director. He did Roots, Rich Man, Poor Man. He was from London, and he didn't really watch The Carol Burnett Show. In fact, he really didn't know much of her work at all. But when he signed on to direct Friendly Fire, her name popped in his head because he had read all about her childhood and how absent her parents were and how she raised Chrissy while she herself was being raised. And it stuck with him, and he was just fascinated with it. He thought that someone with that kind of background had to have the emotional capability to play this heavy role. Well, when he told ABC that he wanted to cast Carol, they were like, from what? How? Why her? And he said, I don't know, I just have a hunch. Well, they were like, a hunch? A hunch? No, You gotta go find something that proves not only to us, but to you that she can do this role. Otherwise, we're gonna cast Joanne Woodward or Donna Reed or Cloris Leachman. So he screened the closest thing to a drama, which up to that point was Pete and Tilly. That didn't convince him, but as he was going through tapes of the Carol Burnett show, he saw the last episode, the one with the speech that Carol delivers while she's dressed as her famous charwoman character, and he was awestruck by it. It was an impromptu speech, and he noticed that Carol wanted to cry but didn't. He also noticed that perhaps there was a bit of anger beneath it all, but that Carol was remaining professional and in control. He knew she only had a couple of minutes to get everything out, and that she'd be damned if she was going to seem anything but grateful and loving. In this, he saw Peg Mullen and was 100% convinced that Carol could do the job, and do the job she did. Friendly Fire was filmed up north in Stockton, California, and while Carol was up there, she actually... Well, first of all, remember the beginning of this tour when I told you all about Malcolm, the troublemaker who lived in Carol's building, the one who threw matches down the air shaft? Well, he was living in Stockton, and he looked Carol up and invited her to dinner. She accepted, and he showed up at her hotel on a motorcycle. Good old Malcolm, Carol thought, as he handed her a helmet. She put it on and hopped on the back, and they weaved through the streets of Stockton as Malcolm took Carol to his house. He actually had a house. She couldn't believe it. She actually couldn't believe he was still alive. But not only that, he had a wife, he had a family, and they all sat around his kitchen table reminiscing about the old days. Carol brought up the rock throwing incident, the one that Malcolm blamed on Asher. He didn't remember it, but he said, yeah, that sounds like me. They had experienced a very long passage of time. It was heavy, and on top of all of the drama that Carol was going through with Carrie, it just sort of lent itself to this extremely dramatic performance, one of Carol's absolute best. Friendly Fire was a huge ratings hit, and they were rewarded with 7 Emmy nominations, including one for Best Actress for Carol Burnett. She didn't win, but they did take home the top prize for Outstanding Drama Special. On September 16th, 1979, Carol starred in The 10th Month, a drama about a divorced journalist in her 40s who gets pregnant and decides to keep the baby. Carol's really great in it, but it was written by Joan Tewksbury, who had collaborated with Robert Altman on one of my all-time favorite films, 1975's Nashville. But amongst all of these dramas and all the drama at home, Carol put on her happy face and returned to comedy and music to do a special with Dolly Parton called Dolly and Carol in Nashville, produced by Joe and written by Ken Welch and his wife Mitzi for CBS, which aired on Valentine's Day of 1979. And if that wasn't enough, Carol and Joe were having dinner with Tim Conway and his wife when Carol got this wild urge to bring the gang back together. She really had started to miss the show and decided to put together a few episodes that would air in the summer of 1979. They got Lyle and Vicky, and the gang reunited for 4 episodes and called it Carol Burnett and Company. Penny Marshall, Cheryl Ladd, and Sally Field all guest starred. Then later that year, People magazine did a cover story on Carol and Carrie's struggle with addiction. The two of them actually decided to get ahead of what they thought would have eventually become tabloid fodder. They said, you know what, let's tell it before anyone else can. And they were both very honest and brutal and upfront about everything. They even did the talk show circuit. You know, again, this wasn't a case where some rich Beverly Hills girl had absent parents and was off somewhere getting high. Carol's kids spent as much time with her as any other kid growing up with a working mom. She, like so many other parents, thought they were doing everything right and everything possible to avoid having kids on drugs, but this was just something that escaped Carol's control, and countless parents across the country could relate to this. It reminded everyone that drugs aren't prejudice. They don't just affect rich people, they don't just affect poor people, they don't affect any type of people. They affect any and everyone. Carol represented them, and I think this only made people love and respect her even more. Also in 1979, Carol teamed up with Robert Altman for a second time to do a forgotten movie called Health. Like Nashville, this would be a parody, a satire of American politics set at a health food convention in a luxury Florida hotel, but unlike Nashville, this one isn't very good. Look, I adore Altman's work, so his worst movie is still better than a lot of movies. This one's just so bizarre, but the cast, oh my gosh, the cast. Carol starred alongside Glenda Jackson, Lauren Bacall, James Garner, Henry Gibson, Paul Dooley, who also co-wrote the film, and my favorite interviewer ever, Dick Cavett. It's really fun to watch for the cast, but it was such a bomb that it didn't even get released until 3 years later. Finally, the 80s hit, and in March of 1980, Carol went to work on what I have to say is my favorite movie of hers, The Four Seasons.
Is this the fun part? Are we having fun yet?
Through winter, spring, summer,
Oh my God, the boat's moving!
You go ahead, folks. I'll catch up.
and fall.
I wonder what other people do on their vacations.
Somehow, they survive it all. Alan Alda, Carol Burnett, Len Cariou, Sandy Dennis, Rita Moreno, Bess Armstrong, and Jack Weston. Friendship is like the seasons. The Four Seasons, written and directed by Alan Alda.
I told you in the beginning of this, it's my dad's favorite movie, and it's definitely the one that's the most special to me. And honestly, it's kind of what my first memories of Carol Burnett really were. My parents were like the people in this movie, and I recognized them in these characters. It's kind of a weird mind trip, really, because it's so embedded in my brain, this movie. I think it's so underrated. It was released in theaters, but it was then shown on cable all the time growing up. It was written and directed by our good friend Alan Alda, and oh, how I wish movies like this could be made again. It's just about relationships, that's all. 3 different couples who vacation together 4 times a year, every season. A ski trip, a sailing trip, a spring retreat, and a college trip in the fall for Parents' Weekend. You know, nothing major happens. It's just all these different relationships, experiencing life changes that happen to them, all in the interim, and how it comes together to affect their vacations. And it's just so adult. It's so early 80s. It's spectacular. It also features Len Cariou, Rita Moreno, Jack Weston, Bess Armstrong, and Oscar winner Sandy Dennis, who is just one of my all-time favorites. The movie filmed for 3 months in North Carolina, Georgia, Vermont, and the Virgin Islands. It was released on May 22nd, 1981, and ended up making $10 million in its first week. Really, really big back then. And then going on to eventually gross $50 million worldwide. Carol finally had a big hit movie. Then she didn't. Choo Choo and the Philly Flash was a film released by 20th Century Fox in August of 1981. It starred Carol and Alan Arkin as a lovable loser duo who end up in a series of trouble and mishaps. It's so incredibly weird and goofy and silly and strange, but again, it's Carol, so it's really fun. But what wasn't fun was that Carol and Joe were dealt a major blow when it turned out that poor Carrie was using again. She had really cleaned up for her parents' sake, for her sister's sake, not really her own sake, and that happens to addicts a lot. But it was devastating nonetheless, especially considering the Hamiltons were planning a move to Hawaii. They had visited Jim Neighbors over the years and decided to build a house on 5 acres that they had bought from Jim on the southern tip of Maui. Aaron and Jody would be attending 6th and 8th grade there, and Carrie, unfortunately, had dropped out of school and had no interest in joining the family. Carol was beyond devastated, but knew that she had to let Carrie go and let her clean herself up. There's been more written about it. Again, it was all super sad and traumatic, and it doesn't need to be rehashed. The family kept the Alpine Drive house here in Beverly Hills, but moved to their new home in Hawaii, and Carrie stayed behind. She kept in touch, but stayed at various friends' places, some nights even on the streets, and she continued her journey of drug use until about the end of 1981 when, and this is really what telling this story is all about, Carrie went into full-on recovery mode and got herself sober for good. And ironically, in 1982, Carol did the TV movie Life of the Party, playing a character based on Beatrice Jorgensen, the founder of Los Angeles' first AA chapter for women. It's another excellent performance, but there's a cute story about the making of it. Ellie Puritz was an associate producer on it. When Ellie was 18 years old back in 1970, she was involved in a horrific car accident that left her bedridden and blind. Every week, she would listen to the Carol Burnett show, and for that 1 hour, she would experience so much joy that she wrote Carol a fan letter, and Carol wrote her back. Well, 6 years later, she recovered, regained her eyesight, and moved to Los Angeles, where she became a production assistant on the Sonny and Cher show, which shot directly across the hall from Carol Burnett's show. And one day, Ellie ran into Carol, she showed her the letters, and the two ladies shared a special hug. And now, Ellie was a producer on Life of the Party. Always, always treat your production assistants well. Carol was given the opportunity to live out one of her childhood fantasies in 1981. We know that growing up, she loved the movie musicals so much that she went on to spoof them regularly on her show. This gave her a chance to star in big, lavish musical numbers because really, Hollywood had stopped making movie musicals. I mean, Grease was a huge success at the end of the 70s, but the genre itself just wasn't that big anymore. So it was a delight when Columbia Pictures decided to make a film version of the 1977 hit Broadway musical, Annie. Yes, we are at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, but sometimes studios shoot on other studios' sound stages, which was the case for a handful of Annie's scenes. Originally, in 1979, it was announced that the film would be made with Carol Burnett and Jack Nicholson under the direction of someone else, but then in 1980, Ray Stark was producing it with John Huston directing, and Nicholson was out. Albert Finney would be playing Daddy Warbucks, and this is funny. Annie won 7 Tonys. One of them was for Dorothy Loudon, who played Miss Hannigan. Dorothy replaced Carol on the Gary Moore show when she left, and now Carol was taking the film version. Alongside her would be Eileen Quinn in the title role. Bernadette Peters would be Lily, and Steve Martin was offered the role of Rooster but turned it down because he was breaking up with Bernadette at the time and thought it would be too difficult to work together, so Tim Curry luckily accepted the part. And finally, the role of Grace would be played by Broadway legend Anne Reinking. The film was released on May 23rd, 1982. It wasn't quite the hit everyone had hoped it would be. Critics were mixed, but it made back its money and was a huge success when it came to video cassette sales, which, as a result, it sort of grew into this cult film, especially with us Gen Xers. It's an overused word, but this film is truly iconic.
In 1981, I got a call from producer Ray Stark asking me to play Miss Hannigan in the film version of the Broadway hit musical Annie. I jumped at the chance. The girls and I had been spending a lot of time in Hawaii, and I think I might have been suffering from island fever. Besides, I had never had the good fortune of being in a movie musical, and the idea of it thrilled me, especially when I heard that my friend Bernadette Peters was going to play Lily along with Tim Curry, star of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, as Rooster, and the brilliant actor Albert Finney as Daddy Warbucks. The producers had conducted a massive talent search and discovered the adorable 10-year-old Aileen Quinn to play Annie. To top it all off, the movie was to be directed by the one and only John Huston. John Huston rarely did more than 2 takes for a scene. He knew what he wanted, got it, and that was that. My kind of guy. My very first day, I asked him for direction in the scene I was about to do, and he simply said, "Cavort, dear, just cavort." Okay, got it. He hired me to cavort, so I'll cavort away. After a few days of shooting, some of us felt that the movie was being overproduced. Although Mr. Houston was always graciously encouraging his actors to discuss how to play a scene, it wasn't our place to make any comments to our director on our feelings about producer Ray Stark's production values or how he wanted to spend his money. However, because of my television training, I couldn't get over the huge amount of money that was being lavished on the street set. Along with Annie's orphanage, Easy Street was home to dozens of storefronts and old townhouses complete with fire escapes. There were fishmongers with push carts selling fish wrapped in old newspapers. There were stores selling old clothes, dolls, dishes. It was a monumentally beautiful set that, in my mind anyway, could have cost a lot less than the many, many thousands of dollars being spent. Okay, maybe none of the above sounds overboard, but consider that the fish wrapped in the old newspapers were real fish. Only the tail stuck out, and you really couldn't even see them in the final shot. As far as I was concerned, at most all they needed was a fake rubber tail sticking out, for crying out loud. I don't know how much money that would have saved, but it sure would have cut down on the smell. I took a look in the windows of the faux pawn shops and saw dozens and dozens of authentic pieces of antique jewelry and watches on display, which you also couldn't see in any of the shots. The porcelain dolls were collectibles. What was that all about? And you never saw any of this in the final movie. Then it came time to shoot the Easy Street number. In the original Broadway show, the number featured only Hannigan, Rooster, and Lily. The number took place in a room in the orphanage with only the three characters. It was simple, and it had been a showstopper on stage. Now, here comes the movie version. With its 400 dancers, Easy Street rehearsed for weeks. We swung and climbed on the fire escapes. We danced up the street, we danced down the street. With all these dancers, the original intent of the number was completely lost. The whole thing looked like a big bucket of worms. As far as I could tell, there was no point being made other than big. Bernadette, Tim, and I just shook our heads and soldiered on. This number was going nowhere, and if I wasn't mistaken, it was costing upward of $1 million. The filming was over. Mr. Houston kissed my hand, and we gave each other a big hug. We all said our goodbyes and headed home. Me to Maui, Bernadette to New York, and Tim to England. Once I was back in Hawaii, I decided to go for something special. A chin. I'd always wanted a chin. I was born with a weak one, which may explain why I went into comedy. I remember the wonderful comedy writer Larry Gelbart saying in some article, "Carol Burnett is almost very pretty," and I remember being quoted as replying, "That was almost very nice of him." Anyhow, now I had a chin, thanks to an oral surgeon in Honolulu who had corrected the problem. Even though I still wasn't very pretty, I was very thrilled. I could feel the Maui rain on my chin without having to look up. It wasn't a huge difference, 3 millimeters to be precise, but it made a big difference to me. The phone rang. It was Ray Stark calling from California. Carol, we're going to reshoot the Easy Street number with just the three of you, Bernadette, Tim, and you. It'll be so much better this way. Yep, agreed, but why didn't they think of this in the first place? Ray, there's one little problem. I have a chin. What? I have a new chin. Oral surgery? I was operated on a month ago in Honolulu. The doctor added about 3 millimeters, and gosh, I don't know, it might be noticeable. Slight pause. No, Carol, no problem. There won't be any scenes where we go from close-up to close-up. No one will notice a thing. Plus, you're in all that costume and makeup. There'll be a lot of scenes in between. Nobody's going to be looking at your chin. Trust me. Okay by me. It was great to be reunited with Tim and Bernadette and Mr. Houston. And it was great to know that they had decided to scrap the Easy Street 400 dancer debacle and simplify the number, with all of it taking place inside the orphanage. We were getting ready for the first shot when Mr. Houston said, "All right, now I want to back up the scene a little and pick it up where Carol comes out of the closet waving the locket." I approached him cautiously. "Mr. Houston." "Carol, when are you going to call me John?" John? Excuse me, but 2 months ago, when we shot this scene, I went into the closet with no chin, and now I'm coming out of the closet with a chin. I just want to call that to your attention." He thought for a moment and then said, "All right then, dear. Just come out looking determined."
1982 was great and not so great for Carol and her new chin. Great because Carrie was doing so well, but what wasn't so great was that Joe and Carol's marriage was falling apart, and by the fall they had agreed to a trial separation. Joe, he would live in the Alpine Drive house here in Beverly Hills, while Carol and the girls stayed in Hawaii. Joe and Carol, they maintained extreme privacy through their separation, and neither of them really ever spoke about why their marriage didn't last, but you just really can't call it a failure. I mean, they were together for like 17 or 18 years, close to 20 years. That's not a failure. It's two people moving in new directions. I mean, who knows why marriages crumble? Many reasons, but the two of them, they created 2 decades worth of really phenomenal artistic endeavors, TV shows, specials, projects, not to mention 3 beautiful daughters. There didn't seem to be any animosity, and they were able to keep it all very quiet and pretty close to home. Carol and Joe made a TV movie that aired on March 15th, 1982 called Eunice. It revived the character from the family sketch and gave Carol a chance to work with Vicky and Harvey again, as well as Betty White, who played Ellen, Mama's oldest daughter. But put a pin in that for a second, because I have to show you something that has nothing to do with anything we're talking about, but horror fans might recognize this spot immediately because, well, for starters, it's iconic, and it also looks the exact same as it did in 1978. But this is where Jamie Lee Curtis sees Michael Myers in Halloween for the first time, when she and her girlfriends are walking home from school. I can't get over that these people have kept the hedges the exact same. I mean, it's perfect. Like, I feel like Michael is actually going to jump out. Okay, why are we here? Because Joe decided he wanted to turn the sketch into a TV series focusing on Mama. The show would be called Mama's Family, and it would star, of course, Vicky in the lead role, and this house would serve as the exterior location for the run of this series. Little facts like this, that the Mama's Family house is on the same street from Halloween. I love when Hollywood collides like that. Anyway, this show focused more on Mama's youngest son, Vinton, played wonderfully by Ken Berry. His wife, Naomi, was played fantastically by Dorothy Lyman, and also we would get Rue McClanahan as Mama's sister and Betty White playing Ellen, before the Golden Girls, of course. And for those of you Betty White fans who may not know this, I have the honor of being the last person Betty ever played Password with. Truly a highlight of my life. Not just because she won me 25 grand. But anyway, Mama's Family debuted on January 22nd, 1983. Oddly enough, on NBC, not CBS. Carol, she guest starred on the show a handful of times, even though she and Joe were no longer together. They maintained a professional relationship on set. And only after 2 seasons, NBC canceled Mama's Family. However, 2 years later, in 1986, Joe revived the series for syndication, something that really hadn't happened much before, with TV shows, and surprisingly, ratings were so successful it became the highest rated sitcom in syndication. Really a tremendous feat, something that wouldn't happen again until Baywatch. All in all, Mama's Family ran for a total of 6 seasons, finally closing up shop on February 24th, 1990.
Saturday, look who's back.
Monster Eunice is here!
Carol Burnett guest stars on Mama's Family.
Oddly enough, right after Joe and Carol separated, she played a recently divorced woman opposite Elizabeth Taylor in an HBO movie called Between Friends that aired on September 11th, 1983. The movie filmed in Canada in the early part of '83, and Carol and Liz, or CB and ET as they called one another, became fast great friends. The entire time Carol was on the set, she was thinking to herself, Nanny would never believe I was making a movie with the one and only Liz Taylor. The two of them, they sat in movie houses just marveling at Liz's beauty when Carol was little, and now here they were, starring together. It was a huge departure for Carol, playing a horny nymphomaniac divorcee, and it's a joy to watch. Also, at the end of '83, Carol did another special, this one with Placido Domingo, called Burnett Discovers Domingo, and that aired on January 27th, 1984.
In the early 1980s, the girls and I decided to move back from Hawaii to the mainland and resettle in Los Angeles. Joe was there, and we wanted the girls to be closer to him. Since he was living in an apartment on Wilshire Boulevard, I looked in that area and was able to find a 2-bedroom place on the 18th floor in a brand new high-rise called the Wilshire House, a few blocks away from Joe's building. At that time, the corridor, as Wilshire Boulevard is often called, had a lot of construction going on. Apartment buildings were springing up all over the place, but not too many people were buying. In fact, the girls and I were the first and for a time the only residents of the Wilshire House. Living there could have been the basis for a sitcom. There I was, with no neighbors, 6 valet parking attendants, Chauncey the handyman, and Ruth the telephone operator. Friends would phone, and Ruth would answer. The Wilshire House, how may I help you? The reply would be, is she home? Mine would be the only apartment lit up at night. When I got into the elevator, it was always an express. The parking attendants fought over who would open my car door just so they could have something to do. Chauncey was always asking me if my pilot light and faucets were okay because, like the valets, he didn't have much to do either. In a peculiar way, we were a family of sorts. The following Christmas, the girls and I spent 2 weeks in Honolulu. When I returned, Chauncey was helping me with my luggage, and as we got into the express elevator, he said, "Sure good to have you back, Ms. B. You know, the old place just wasn't the same without you." We lived there like that for 1 whole year. When other people started moving in, we moved out. That was purely a coincidence, but it always struck me as funny.
In 1984, exactly 30 years after she left Hollywood to move to New York City, Carol found herself doing the exact same thing, this time moving into a 2-room suite at the Wyndham Hotel. And like the last time, she would be doing it alone. She was now divorced from Joe, single. Carrie was thriving at Pepperdine, and Jody was in college, and Aaron was going to school. Everyone was doing well, and Carol was now a woman in her 50s, a whole new ballgame, especially in Hollywood. Her career wasn't slowing down, though. She was always working, but now she was going to focus her attention on writing. She found herself really thinking of her parents a lot, Nanny a lot, and her own role as a mother, and she began writing down little tidbits of her childhood, stories that she liked, for her daughters to read one day. The more she started scribbling, the more she started writing, and everything about the past just came flooding back and pouring out of her. In 1985, Carol momentarily paused her writing to work with Robert Altman once again, their 3rd time working together. Altman, he worked with so many wonderful actors. To play in the sandbox with Carol 3 times should tell you how really talented he thought she was. And this time they would do a 1-hour drama, a teleplay for HBO called The Laundromat. How great if HBO would do those again. Just little one-acts here and there. But this one featured Carol and Amy Madigan playing two strangers who meet in an all-night laundromat. Michael Wright, he's a great actor who's also in it. I loved him on Oz. But if you want to know more about Amy, which you should, check out my Uncle Buck tour, also on YouTube. The Laundromat is fun, though. It's short, it got good reviews, and Amy won a Best Actress Cable Ace Award for it. Oh, but it didn't shoot here or anything. In fact, it shot in Paris, France, but look where we are, back here on Yucca. Carol had continued writing, and by the summer of '85, she had been finding herself so drawn back to this building. She would wake up sobbing from these vivid, intense dreams she would have about 102. Sometimes she'd dream about renovating it, ripping up the floors and the walls. It was such a strong emotional pull that on August 18th, 1985, Carol found herself back here on Yucca once again. It had been over 30 years since she had lived here, and she offered the current tenants of 102 1 month's worth of rent if they would let her walk around the apartment for an hour by herself. Just Carol and her tape recorder.
I went back for the first time in years to Yucca and Wilcox and 102. The people who live there now let me go in alone and sit for a while. I took my tape recorder. I walked in and I just stood there for a few moments, and I pressed the on button.
Well, I'm here. I'm in 102. It's August of 1985. And the last time I lived here in this neighborhood was 1954 when I left to go to New York. It's as small as I remember it. Murphy bed is gone. They put a shower curtain up over the hole in the wall. Closet is still in there. Almost looks like the same carpet. Oh, Mammy. I'm looking out the window, and I'm looking out at the Victory Garden area just below the window. Oh man, I used to run up and down that strip of dirt. It's the same kind of white tile in the kitchen. Hasn't changed. And I'm walking now into the little dressing room. And closing the door. It's a mirror. Full-length mirror. It's not cracked anymore. Somebody fixed it. Where I used to pose and pretend I was Betty Grable. And I'm in the bathroom. I haven't changed the sink. Same old sink. There's no medicine cabinet. There are holes in the wall where it was taken down. The same drawers in the dressing table.
I pushed the off button for a couple of minutes and I walked back into the main room. I was crying like crazy. It was a peculiar feeling because here I was weeping and recording it. I wanted to put my feelings on tape, but I had the weirdest sensation that I was intruding upon myself, spying. I was getting in my own way, time out. I let myself go and it felt good. A couple of minutes went by, and then I pushed the on button.
You think when you're going to go back that it's going to look different? Maybe smaller because you're taller? I don't know. But this is just the way I remembered it. It's the same walls, the same size, the same colors. Oh, I remember lying over there with the chicken box and Daddy sitting just about where I am now. Oh, it's something. It's really something.
Off. On.
I've been here about maybe 15 minutes. I think it's enough. This will be the last time I'll ever see it. I know that. All the years I've dreamed about this room. I was redoing it, remodeling. I was opening it up, breaking down walls, redecorating. I redid this place I redid the whole building. And it hasn't changed. I guess I think it's time to go.
Carol's story for Aaron, Jody, and Carrie turned into a full-on memoir finished by the summer of 1986, and 275,000 copies went into print in October of 1986 under Random House Publishing, which at the time was a record for a first-time author. The book was a hit, and it spent a few weeks on the old New York Times bestseller list, and as I told you in the beginning, a decade later, the book would find itself into the library of my high school, thus changing my life, literally changing my life. I still love it. It's one of my favorite reads. I love so many things in it, and while Carol was in the beginning process of writing it back in 1984, she reached out to Isla Mae, good old Isla Mae, who lived next door here at the Mayfair. The two began writing letters and sending tape recordings to one another, but it didn't last long because, ironically, Carol, who was reaching out to talk about the early days of their lives, had come in contact with poor Isla Mae at the end of hers. The two corresponded for a brief period before Isla Mae passed away in November. Carol wrote her one more letter, even though she had passed, and she ended it by saying, "Isla Mae, if there is something after all of this, I hope we'll be swinging on vines and playing Betty Grable together again, somewhere in that big Pantages in the sky."